The crystal chandelier hanging in Elena Whitmore's penthouse cost more than most people earn in 5 years. It was just one of many expensive things in her home, each carefully chosen to remind visitors that she wasn't just wealthy. She was extraordinarily successful. Her real estate empire had made her a billionaire before she turned 40, and now at 43, she was preparing for the event she looked forward to all year, the annual charity gala. Every spring, Elena opened her Manhattan penthouse to the city's most influential people. Senators, movie stars, tech entrepreneurs, and old money families all gathered in her home, writing checks that funded music programs for underprivileged children. The irony wasn't lost on some people, a woman who lived in luxury raising money for poor kids. But Elena didn't see it that way. She saw it as using her success to make a difference, and the numbers didn't lie. Last year's gala raised $3 million. This year she wanted 4. "Mrs. Whitmore, should I polish the piano again?" The voice came from the kitchen, soft and hesitant. Elena glanced up from her laptop where she was reviewing the guest list. "You polished it yesterday, Rosa." "Yes, ma'am, but I noticed a fingerprint on the side." "Then yes, polish it again." Elena returned to her screen. The piano was the centerpiece of her living room, a custom Steinway worth $250,000. It had been featured in Architectural Digest. Professional musicians who visited her home often ran their fingers along its keys with barely concealed envy. Rosa Martinez had worked for Elena for 12 years. She cleaned the penthouse 3 times a week, did the laundry, organized the closets, and basically kept Elena's life running smoothly behind the scenes. She was quiet, efficient, and never asked for anything beyond her paycheck. Elena appreciated that. She didn't like drama or complications from her staff. What Elena didn't appreciate was when Rosa brought her son along. It had started happening more often lately. Rosa's explanation was always the same. Her usual babysitter was unavailable, or the boy had finished school early, or some other reason that Elena didn't particularly care about. The kid would sit in the kitchen doing homework or reading while Rosa worked. Elena had made it clear she didn't love the arrangement, but Rosa was otherwise perfect at her job, so she tolerated it. The boy's name was David. He was 17, tall and skinny in that awkward teenage way, with his mother's dark eyes and a quiet demeanor that matched hers. He barely spoke when Elena was around, just nodded politely and stayed out of the way. Today was one of those days when he was there. Elena had just finished a conference call about a property development in Brooklyn when she heard it. Music, piano music, flowing through her penthouse like water through a stream. She froze, her hand hovering over her laptop keyboard. Someone was playing her piano. She stood up so quickly her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she strode toward the living room, her jaw tight. The music continued, something classical and melancholic that would have been beautiful if she weren't so angry about who was creating it. She rounded the corner and stopped. David sat at her Steinway, his long fingers moving across the keys with surprising confidence. His eyes were half closed, his posture relaxed in a way she'd never seen from him before. He looked completely absorbed in what he was playing, oblivious to everything else. "Excuse me?" Elena's voice cut through the music like a knife. David's hands jerked away from the keys. He spun around on the bench, his eyes wide. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry, I didn't think—" "You didn't think what? That I'd mind someone touching my $250,000 piano without permission? I'm so sorry." He stood up quickly, nearly tripping over the bench. "I just saw it sitting there and I thought, that's the problem." "You didn't think?" Elena crossed her arms. "This piano isn't a toy. It's a professional instrument and it's not here for you to play around with." "Yes, ma'am. I understand. It won't happen again." Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She was wringing a cleaning cloth in her hands. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. I told David to stay in the kitchen. This is completely my fault. Just make sure it doesn't happen again." Elena's tone was clipped. "David, I need you to go help your mother with whatever she's doing. And please don't touch things that don't belong to you." "Yes, ma'am." David's face had turned red. He kept his eyes on the floor as he walked past Elena toward the kitchen. Rosa followed him, still apologizing in a voice so quiet Elena could barely hear it. Elena stood alone in her living room looking at the piano. She walked over and examined it for scratches or marks, running her hand along the glossy black surface. It looked fine. Still, the principal bothered her. Staff and their families needed to understand boundaries. This was her home, her space, her things. She returned to her office and tried to focus on work, but the interruption had thrown off her concentration. She found herself thinking about the music she'd heard. It had actually sounded pretty good, not that it mattered. The kid probably took some lessons at school or something. Lots of teenagers played piano at a mediocre level. An hour later, Rosa appeared at her office door. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've finished everything. Is there anything else you need?" "No, that's fine. Same time Thursday?" "Yes, ma'am." Rosa hesitated. "And again, I'm very sorry about today." "It's fine, Rosa. Just make sure David understands he can't touch my things." "He does. He feels terrible." Rosa paused. "He really didn't mean any harm. He just loves music so much, and when he sees a piano, he can't help himself sometimes." Elena looked up from her computer. "He plays regularly?" "When he can. There's an old piano at our church. The priest lets him practice there sometimes when the building is open." "I see." Elena's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "I'll see you Thursday, Rosa." After Rosa and David left, Elena walked back to the living room. She sat on the couch across from the piano, looking at it. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making the polished surface gleam. She thought about David's face when she'd caught him, how embarrassed he'd been. Good, she thought. Maybe embarrassment would teach him a lesson about respecting other people's property. She'd worked hard for everything she had. She'd built her company from nothing, fighting her way through a male-dominated industry, making sacrifices and smart decisions. Nobody had handed her anything. That piano represented success. It represented arriving. It was meant to be admired, occasionally played by the professional musician she hired for the gala, but mostly it was there as a statement piece. A beautiful, expensive statement that told everyone who entered her home exactly who Elena Whitmore was. It wasn't there for some teenager to mess around with. Elena picked up her phone and called her event coordinator. "Patricia, where are we on final preparations for the gala?" As Patricia ran through the checklist, Elena's mind wandered. 3 weeks until the event. 3 weeks until her home would be filled with the people who mattered. The people who could write checks that changed lives. 3 weeks until she proved, once again, that she was more than just wealthy. She was someone who made a difference. She just had to make sure everything was perfect, including keeping that piano safe from curious teenagers who didn't understand its value. 2 weeks before the gala, Elena's phone rang at 7 in the morning. She was already awake, running on her treadmill while watching the financial news. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. Patricia never called this early unless something was wrong. "Please tell me you're calling with good news," Elena said, not slowing her pace. "I'm so sorry, Elena." Patricia's voice was tight with stress. "Gregory canceled." Elena hit the stop button on the treadmill. "What do you mean, canceled?" "His father had a stroke last night. He's flying to Boston this morning to be with his family. He said there's no way he can perform at the gala." Gregory Chen was the pianist Elena had hired 6 months ago. He'd performed at Carnegie Hall, won international competitions, and his calendar was booked solid for the next 2 years. Elena had paid a premium just to secure him for one evening. The musical performance wasn't just background entertainment. It was one of the highlights of the entire event. Her guests expected it. They talked about it for months afterward. "Find someone else," Elena said, stepping off the treadmill. "I've been trying since he called me at midnight. Everyone worth hiring is already booked. Spring is the busy season for these performers, and most of them have commitments every single weekend." Elena grabbed her towel and wiped her face. "There has to be someone. I have a list of possibilities, but Elena, they're not at Gregory's level. Some of them are good, but our guests will notice the difference. I don't pay you to give me problems, Patricia. I pay you to solve them." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I understand. I'll keep looking." Elena ended the call and stood in her home gym, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. This couldn't be happening. Everything about the gala had to be perfect. The food, the flowers, the wine, the auction items, and yes, the music. Especially the music, because this was a fundraiser for children's music education. If word got out that she'd settled for a mediocre pianist, people would talk. They'd say she didn't care enough to get it right. For the next week, Patricia called with updates. Each one was worse than the last. One pianist was available but wanted triple the usual fee. Another was technically skilled but had a reputation for being difficult and unreliable. A third option was recovering from wrist surgery and couldn't guarantee they'd be ready in time. Elena rejected all of them. She tried to focus on other aspects of the gala. But the pianist problem gnawed at her constantly. She barely slept. During meetings, her mind wandered. She snapped at her assistant over minor mistakes and sent back the sample menu from the caterer 3 times because nothing seemed right. Rosa noticed the tension during her Thursday cleaning session. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked quietly while organizing the kitchen. "It's fine," Elena said curtly, then sighed. "Actually, no. It's not fine. I'm having a major problem with the gala and I can't seem to fix it." Rosa didn't respond, just continued wiping down the counters. Elena appreciated that about her. She didn't pry or offer unwanted advice. But an hour later, when Elena was pacing in her living room on yet another frustrating call with Patricia, she overheard Rosa on the phone in the kitchen. "No, Mijo, I can't come get you early today. I still have 2 more hours of work. I know you wanted to practice at the church, but Father Miguel said it's closed today for repairs. Maybe tomorrow." "I love you too." Elena ended her call with Patricia and walked into the kitchen. Rosa was putting her phone away, looking apologetic. "Sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, that was quick. David wanted me to pick him up, but I told him he wanted to practice piano?" Elena asked. "Yes, ma'am. He usually goes to our church after school. There's an old piano there, but they're doing some construction work this week, so the building is closed." Elena opened her mouth to say something polite and dismiss the conversation, but then stopped. An idea was forming, one she immediately wanted to reject as ridiculous. She pushed it away, but it came back. Over the next few days, the pianist situation got even worse. One promising candidate fell through. Another turned out to have a scheduling conflict Elena's team had missed. Patricia was starting to sound defeated, suggesting they might need to use recorded music or even cancel the performance portion entirely. "Absolutely not," Elena said firmly. "That's not an option. Then I don't know what else to do. We've contacted every professional pianist in the tri-state area." After that call, Elena sat at her desk for a long time. She looked at the piano in her living room, remembering the sound she'd heard 2 weeks ago. It had been good. Actually, it had been better than good. The kid had been playing from memory, his fingers confident despite being caught. No, it was a stupid idea. This was a high society event with guests who had season tickets to the Metropolitan Opera. They donated millions to Lincoln Center. They knew what real talent sounded like. But what choice did she have? Elena picked up her phone and called Rosa. "I need to ask you something about David." "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Is something wrong?" "You said he plays piano. How well does he play?" There was surprise in Rosa's voice. "He's very talented, ma'am. He's been playing since he was 5 years old." "Has he had formal training?" "Some. When he was younger, a teacher at his elementary school gave him free lessons for 2 years. After that, he taught himself mostly. He watches videos online, practices whenever he can. A man at our church used to give him lessons sometimes, but he moved away last year." Elena drummed her fingers on her desk. "Could he play at an event? In front of people?" "He's played at church services a few times. Small gatherings. Nothing fancy." "This would be very fancy, Rosa." There was a long pause. "Are you asking if David could play at your gala?" "I'm asking if it's even possible. If he could handle playing for 300 people." "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know what to say. Does he know classical pieces? Chopin, Beethoven, that kind of thing?" "Yes, ma'am. He loves classical music." "He knows many pieces." Elena closed her eyes. She couldn't believe she was actually considering this. "I need to hear him play. Really play. Not just catch him for 30 seconds. Can you bring him here tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" "Yes, of course." "What time?" 4 o'clock, and Rosa? Tell him to prepare something impressive. This is an audition, not a favor." That night, Elena barely slept. She kept thinking about what her guests would say if she hired her housekeeper's teenage son to perform at the most important social event of her year. She imagined the whispers, the raised eyebrows, the stories that would spread through Manhattan's social circles. But she also kept hearing that music in her head, the melody David had been playing before she'd interrupted him. There had been something real in it, something that felt genuine in a way that even some professional performances didn't. Maybe it wouldn't work. Probably it wouldn't work. She'd listen to him play tomorrow, realize it was a terrible idea, and tell Patricia to just hire whoever was available, even if they weren't perfect, but she had to know for sure. At 3:45 the next afternoon, Elena stood in her living room, arms crossed, waiting. She'd cleared her schedule for the rest of the day. Patricia knew what was happening and had expressed serious doubts. But Elena had shut down that conversation quickly. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock. Elena opened the door to find Rosa and David standing in the hallway. David was wearing khaki pants and a white button-down shirt that looked slightly too big for him. His hair was neatly combed. He looked terrified. "Come in," Elena said. They stepped inside. Rosa was clutching her purse like a lifeline. David's eyes went immediately to the piano, then back to the floor. "David," Elena said, her voice businesslike. "Your mother says you play piano. I need a pianist for an event in 2 weeks. Before I even consider hiring you, I need to know if you're actually good enough. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I don't want to waste time. Play something. Something challenging. Something that will show me what you can actually do." David nodded and walked slowly to the piano. He sat down on the bench, placed his hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. Elena pulled out her phone, ready to check her email if this turned into a disaster. Then David began to play, and Elena forgot all about her phone. The first notes filled the penthouse like morning light breaking through darkness. Elena had heard professional musicians play this piano dozens of times. Concert pianists, conservatory graduates, people who'd spent their entire lives perfecting their craft. But something about the way David played was different. His fingers moved across the keys with a sureness that seemed impossible for someone so young, someone who'd learned mostly from videos and borrowed practice time. He was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and he wasn't just playing the notes. He was feeling them. His eyes closed halfway through the first section, his body swaying slightly with the melody. The music filled every corner of the room, soft and powerful at the same time. Elena's phone hung forgotten in her hand. She'd meant to stand, to maintain her position of authority, but without realizing it, she'd sat down on the couch. Rosa stood frozen by the doorway, tears streaming down her face without making a sound. The piece built and swelled, David's hands dancing across the keys with impossible grace. There were moments of quiet delicacy, then surges of emotion that made Elena's chest feel tight. She'd heard this piece performed by professionals who made her feel nothing. But this 17-year-old kid playing in her living room was making her forget about her gala. Her problems, everything except the music. When the final notes faded, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. David opened his eyes and turned slowly to face Elena. His expression was uncertain, vulnerable in a way that made him look even younger than 17. Elena realized her mouth was slightly open. She closed it and cleared her throat. "How long have you been playing that piece?" "About 2 years, ma'am. I heard it in a movie and wanted to learn it." 2 years. Elena stood up, trying to regain her composure. "And you learned it from videos?" "Mostly, and a lot of practice. The church piano isn't as nice as this one, but I go whenever I can." Elena walked to the window and looked out at the city, her mind racing. She'd expected competence at best, maybe something good enough to pass if she closed her eyes and pretended he was a professional. But this was different. This was real talent, the kind that couldn't be taught, only developed. "Can you play other pieces?" she asked, still facing the window. "Yes, ma'am. I know a lot of classical music. Beethoven, Debussy, Rachmaninoff. Play something else. Something different from what you just played." David turned back to the piano. This time he chose Debussy's Clair de Lune. Elena knew this piece well. It was beautiful, but could easily sound cliché if not played with the right touch. Within seconds, she knew David had that touch. The piece shimmered through the penthouse like moonlight on water, exactly as the title suggested. When he finished, Elena finally turned around. Patricia would think she was crazy. Half her social circle would probably whisper behind her back. But standing in her living room, watching this kid who could create such beauty, she made a decision. "I'll pay you $500 to perform at my gala in 2 weeks." David's eyes went wide. Rosa gasped. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's too much." "It's not negotiable. That's what I'm offering." Elena walked to her desk and pulled out a notepad. "The event starts at 7. I'll need you to play during the cocktail hour and between dinner courses. That's about 2 hours total with breaks. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. You'll need to prepare a specific program. Elena started writing. I want a mix of classical pieces. Some familiar ones like what you just played, but also some more impressive works, things that will show technical skill. Do you know any Rachmaninoff? I know his prelude in C-sharp minor. Good, that one's dramatic. My guests will like it. What about something more upbeat? Something energetic? David thought for a moment. I could play Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu. Perfect, Elena continued writing. Here's what I need from you. Come back in 3 days and play for me again. I want to hear your full program. And David? She looked up at him. You'll need to wear proper concert attire. A black suit, white shirt, black tie. Do you have something like that? David's face fell slightly. No, ma'am, Rosa stepped forward. I can find something, Mrs. Whitmore, maybe borrow from... I'll have my assistant send over a suit. Elena made a note. Consider it part of the payment. You'll need to look professional. For the first time, David smiled. It transformed his whole face. I won't let you down, Mrs. Whitmore, I promise. After Rosa and David left, Elena sat at her piano bench, running her hand along the keys. She picked up her phone and called Patricia. Tell me you found someone, Patricia said immediately. I did. Oh, thank God. Who? Anyone I know? Elena hesitated. It's someone local. Very talented. You'll meet him at the gala. Wait, why won't I meet him before? Elena, I need to coordinate with whoever's performing. He'll be ready. Trust me on this. You're being mysterious, which usually means I'm not going to like something. Patricia, when have I ever let you down? There was a long sigh. Fine. But if this goes wrong, you owe me a very expensive bottle of wine. Over the next 3 days, Elena found herself thinking about David constantly. She wondered if she'd made a huge mistake. Maybe the performance had seemed better than it was because she'd been desperate. Maybe under pressure, with 300 people watching, he'd fall apart. When David returned for his second audition, Elena had invited Patricia to listen without telling her who was playing. Patricia arrived looking curious and slightly irritated. This mystery pianist better be worth the secrecy, she muttered. Then David walked in. Patricia looked at Elena with confusion, then recognition, then alarm. That's Rosa's son. Yes. Elena, please tell me you're not. Just listen. David played his entire program. Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, and then something Elena hadn't expected. An original composition he'd written himself. It was beautiful and contemporary, weaving classical techniques with modern harmonies. When he finished, Patricia sat in stunned silence. Finally, she turned to Elena. Where did he train? Mostly self-taught. That's impossible. Apparently not. Patricia stood and walked over to David. How old are you? 17, ma'am. 17. She shook her head in disbelief. Do you have any idea how good you are? David's face turned red. I just love playing, ma'am. Patricia looked at Elena. Okay, I was wrong. This could actually work. But Elena, we need to be smart about how we present this. What do you mean? I mean your guests are going to have questions. A lot of questions. We need to be ready with answers that make them excited rather than skeptical. Elena nodded slowly. Patricia was right. The story mattered almost as much as the performance. Over the next week, Elena found herself spending more time thinking about David's performance than almost anything else. She called him twice to check on his practice, offering to let him rehearse at her penthouse to get comfortable with the space and the piano. He came 3 times, always polite, always prepared. During one practice session, Elena asked him, "Why piano? Why not guitar or something easier to access?" David thought about it. When I was 5, my mom took me to this free concert in Central Park. There was a pianist playing, and I remember watching his hands and thinking it looked like magic. Like he was pulling music out of thin air. I wanted to do that too. And your mother supported it? She couldn't afford lessons most of the time, but she never told me to give up. She'd work extra hours to pay for sheet music or save up for that old keyboard I had when I was younger. She believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Elena felt something shift in her chest. She'd been so focused on her own problems, on her gala and her reputation, that she'd barely thought about what this opportunity meant for David and Rosa. The night before the gala, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything that could go wrong. David could freeze up. He could make mistakes. Her guests could be cruel, dismissive, condescending. But she also thought about his hands on the piano keys, the way music seemed to flow through him like breathing. And she realized something that surprised her. She wasn't just worried about her reputation anymore. She was worried about David. She wanted this to work for him, not just for her. When had that happened? When had she started caring about this quiet kid who'd been invisible to her just weeks ago? Tomorrow would answer a lot of questions. Tomorrow, 300 of Manhattan's wealthiest and most influential people would gather in her home, and David would play for all of them. The penthouse looked like something from a magazine spread. White flowers everywhere, candles flickering on every surface, and waiters in crisp uniforms gliding through the space with trays of champagne. Elena stood near the entrance in a navy designer gown, greeting guests as they arrived. She smiled, kissed cheeks, and made small talk, but her mind was elsewhere. David was scheduled to start playing in 20 minutes. She'd barely seen him since he arrived an hour ago. Patricia had whisked him away to a quiet room to warm up and calm his nerves. Elena wanted to check on him but forced herself to stay focused on her hosting duties. Senator Richards had just walked in with his wife. The CEO of a major tech company was right behind them. These were people who expected perfection. "Elena, darling, this is stunning as always." Caroline Bennett air-kissed both of Elena's cheeks. Caroline was old money, the kind of woman who'd attended the Met Gala since she was 20. "I heard you had quite the drama finding a pianist this year." Elena's smile didn't waver. "Nothing I couldn't handle." "Well, I'm dying to hear who you found." Gregory Chen was supposed to be magnificent. "Tonight's performer will surprise you," Elena said smoothly. "I promise." As more guests arrived, the penthouse filled with the sound of conversation and laughter. Everyone held champagne glasses, admired the view, and complimented Elena on the decorations. But she noticed people glancing toward the piano, waiting. Patricia appeared at Elena's elbow. "He's ready." "Nervous but ready." "How nervous?" "He's 17 and about to play for 300 billionaires and celebrities." "How nervous do you think?" Elena's stomach tightened. "Should I talk to him?" "No time. We need to start." Patricia squeezed her arm. "It's going to be fine. Trust the talent." Elena watched as Patricia made her way through the crowd. The conversations continued, but Elena could barely hear them over the sound of her own heartbeat. She'd taken a risk tonight, maybe the biggest risk of her social life. If David fell apart, if he wasn't as good as she remembered, people would talk about this gala for years, and not in a good way. Then she saw him. David emerged from the back hallway, wearing the black suit Elena had bought him. It fit perfectly, making him look older, more confident. But his face was pale, and she could see his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He walked toward the piano as conversations gradually quieted. People were noticing him, curious expressions on their faces. He sat at the bench and adjusted it slightly. The room wasn't completely silent yet. Some guests were still talking, not paying attention. David placed his hands on the keys and sat perfectly still for a moment. His eyes closed. Then he began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu cut through the remaining conversations like a blade through silk. Within seconds, the entire penthouse fell silent. David's hands moved across the keys with breathtaking speed and precision, the notes cascading like water. His earlier nervousness had vanished the moment his fingers touched the piano. Elena had heard this piece before, many times. But never like this. David played with a passion that seemed impossible for someone so young. His whole body moved with the music, leaning into the dramatic moments, pulling back during the delicate sections. He wasn't just performing, he was pouring his soul into every note. The room remained frozen. Elena watched her guests' faces transform from polite interest to genuine amazement. Senator Richards had stopped mid-conversation, his mouth slightly open. Caroline Bennett's champagne glass was tilted at an angle, forgotten. Even the waiters had stopped moving. When the piece ended, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the applause erupted, loud and genuine. David opened his eyes, looking almost surprised to find himself surrounded by people. He stood and gave a small bow, his face flushed. But he wasn't done. He sat back down and transitioned immediately into Debussy's Clair de Lune, not giving the crowd time to return to their conversations. Smart move, Elena thought. Keep them captivated. The Debussy was gentler, dreamier, and it washed over the room like a wave of emotion. Elena saw several women dab at their eyes with napkins. The piece created an atmosphere so beautiful that even the cynical, jaded millionaires in her penthouse seemed touched by it. Elena moved through the room as David played, listening to the whispered conversations. Who is he? I've never heard of him. Where did Elena find this kid? Kid? That's a master playing. During the dinner service, David took a break while guests sat at elegantly decorated tables. Elena found herself swarmed with questions. Elena, you have to tell us about your pianist, demanded Richard Chen, a hedge fund manager. That level of talent doesn't just appear from nowhere. Elena had prepared for this with Patricia. His name is David Torres. He's a local prodigy who's been training since he was 5. I discovered him through a connection and knew immediately that he was special. Is he at Juilliard? Curtis asked Amanda Price, a Broadway producer. Not yet. He's graduating high school this year. Not yet? Amanda's eyes lit up. You mean he's available? Elena, I need his contact information. I have productions that would kill for a musician like that. I'll pass along your information, Elena said, her mind reeling. This was going better than she'd dared to hope. Between the main course and dessert, David returned to the piano. This time he played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. The piece was dark, dramatic, and technically demanding. David attacked it with fierce intensity, his hands flying across the keys. The power of the music seemed to shake the very air in the room. When he finished, the applause was even louder than before. Several people stood up. Elena realized with shock that her guests were giving David a standing ovation. As dessert was served, a tall man with silver hair approached Elena. She recognized him immediately. Vincent Moretti, one of the most respected classical music producers in the world. He'd launched the careers of several international concert pianists. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, extending his hand, I need to speak with you about your pianist. Of course, where has he been hiding? I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've rarely heard raw talent like that. Vincent pulled out a business card. I want to meet with him, properly, discuss his future. His future? That boy could play on international stages. With proper training and guidance, he could be extraordinary. He already is extraordinary, but he could be legendary. Vincent pressed the card into her hand. Please have him call me. This is important. After Vincent walked away, Elena stood holding the card, stunned. More people approached throughout the evening. A director from the Manhattan School of Music, a talent agent, a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell David's story. Everyone wanted a piece of him. For the final performance of the night, David did something Elena hadn't expected. He'd told her he was going to play an original composition, but she hadn't heard it before. He introduced it simply, his voice quiet but clear through the microphone Patricia had set up. This piece is called Tomorrow's Promise. I wrote it for my mother, who taught me that dreams are worth fighting for. The music that followed was unlike anything he'd played all night. It was contemporary but rooted in classical technique, full of hope and longing and determination. Elena found herself completely mesmerized. This wasn't just talent. This was artistry. This was someone who understood music on a level that couldn't be taught. When the final note faded, the room erupted. People rushed toward David, surrounding him with praise and questions and business cards. Elena watched from across the room as her guests, people who usually couldn't be bothered to notice anyone beneath their social class, treated this 17-year-old kid like he was already. Famous Rosa had been watching from the kitchen, staying out of sight during the performance. Elena caught her eye and saw tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming pride and joy. The gala continued for hours, but everyone kept talking about the music. As guests left, they thanked Elena not just for a wonderful evening, but specifically for introducing them to David. Several people wrote larger checks than usual, inspired by the performance. When the last guest finally departed around midnight, Elena found David sitting at the piano, running his fingers silently over the keys. He looked exhausted but happy. You were incredible tonight, Elena said. He looked up, startled. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, for everything. This was the most amazing night of my life. I have about 30 business cards for you from people who want to work with you. David laughed. Then his expression turned serious. I don't know what to do with all of this. That's something we need to talk about, Elena said. You and your mother and I, because David, tonight changed things. You understand that, right? He nodded slowly. I think so. Elena sat down on the piano bench beside him. For the first time, she really looked at him. Not as her housekeeper's son, not as a solution to her problem, but as a person with extraordinary gifts and an uncertain future. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Bring your mother. We have a lot to discuss." Elena spent most of the night after the gala wide awake, staring at the stack of business cards on her nightstand. Producers, agents, school directors, documentary filmmakers, all of them wanting to talk to David. She'd organized them into neat piles, but her mind kept circling back to one card in particular. Vincent Moretti's. She'd done some research after he left. Vincent had discovered 3 pianists who went on to win major international competitions. 2 of them now performed regularly at Carnegie Hall. When Vincent Moretti said someone had potential, people listened. But there was something that bothered Elena, something she couldn't quite name. She got out of bed around 4 in the morning and walked to her living room. The piano sat there in the dim light from the city outside her windows, and she remembered David sitting there just hours ago, surrounded by wealthy strangers treating him like a celebrity. He'd looked overwhelmed, happy but overwhelmed. The next afternoon, Rosa and David arrived at Elena's penthouse exactly on time. Rosa looked nervous, clutching her purse the way she always did when she was anxious. David wore jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like himself than he had in the formal suit. "Please sit down," Elena said, gesturing to the couch. She'd had coffee and pastries set out, though no one seemed interested in eating. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know how to thank you," Rosa began. "What you did for David last night—" "Let me stop you there," Elena said gently. "I didn't do anything except give David an opportunity. What happened last night was all him. His talent, his hard work, his performance." David sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap. Elena pulled out the stack of business cards. "These are all from people who want to work with you, David. Producers, teachers, agents, some very important people in the music world." She set them on the coffee table between them. David's eyes widened as he looked at the pile. "I spent the morning doing research on each of these people," Elena continued. "Making calls, checking reputations. Most of them are legitimate and could genuinely help your career, but I want to talk about one in particular." She pulled out Vincent Moretti's card. "Do you know who Vincent Moretti is?" David shook his head. "He's one of the most respected classical music producers in the world. He's launched major careers. And David, he wants to meet with you. He thinks you could perform internationally with proper training." Rosa put her hand to her mouth. "Internationally?" "That's what he said," Elena paused. "But here's what's been keeping me up since last night. David, you're 17. You're about to graduate high school. What were your plans before all this happened?" David glanced at his mother. "I was accepted to community college. General studies program. I was going to figure out what to do from there. And piano? I was going to keep practicing when I could. Maybe take some music classes," he shrugged. "I never thought it could be more than that. People like me don't become concert pianists. People like you?" Elena leaned forward. "David, people like you are exactly who become concert pianists. People with talent and dedication and passion, but it requires resources, training, practice time, connections, opportunities." She took a breath. "That's what I want to talk to you about." She stood up and walked to her desk, returning with a folder. "I've been thinking about this all night. Actually, I've been thinking about it longer than that. Since the first time I heard you play and realized I'd almost dismissed something extraordinary because of my own prejudices." Rosa and David exchanged confused glances. "I want to offer you a full scholarship," Elena said, opening the folder, "to the Manhattan School of Music, 4 years covering tuition, housing, living expenses, everything. I've already spoken to the director this morning. They're willing to accept you for the fall semester based on last night's performance and an official audition." The room went completely silent. David stared at Elena like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's too much," Rosa stammered. "We could never accept—" "I'm not done," Elena said quietly. "I also want to set up private lessons with one of Vincent's recommended teachers. And I'm establishing a foundation, a fund that will provide similar opportunities to other young musicians from families who can't afford traditional training." "A foundation?" David finally found his voice. "Yes. Called the Torres Music Foundation." Elena sat back down. "David, last night I raised $4.2 million for children's music education. That's more than any previous gala. You know why? Because people were inspired. They saw what's possible when talent gets a real chance. They saw you. Tears were streaming down Rosa's face. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Elena was quiet for a moment. When you first brought David here and I caught him playing my piano, do you know what I saw? I saw someone touching my expensive things without permission. That's all. I didn't see a person, a kid with dreams. I didn't see talent or potential. I just saw an inconvenience. She looked directly at David. I was wrong. And I almost let my own narrow thinking prevent something beautiful from happening. You deserved better than that. Every kid with talent deserves better than that. But the money, Rosa said. This must cost so much. I can afford it, Elena said simply. But more importantly, I can't afford not to do it. What's the point of all this wealth if I'm not using it to change lives? She smiled. Besides, this is an investment. Someday when you're famous and playing at Carnegie Hall, I'll tell everyone I discovered you. David laughed, wiping his eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept. Say you'll work hard and become everything you're capable of becoming. Yes, David said immediately. Yes, absolutely yes. Rosa was openly crying now. Mrs. Whitmore, you've changed our lives. You've changed mine too, Elena said softly. More than you know. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. David had his official audition at the Manhattan School of Music, which was really just a formality after the gala performance. He met with Vincent Moretti, who agreed to mentor him and connect him with the right teachers. The local news picked up the story. Billionaire discovers musical prodigy, and suddenly David was being interviewed on morning shows. Elena watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and wonder. She'd started a foundation, something she'd never really considered before. The Torres Music Foundation would identify talented young musicians from low-income families and provide them with training, instruments, and opportunities. 5 kids had already been selected for the first year, but the biggest change was harder to quantify. Elena found herself playing the piano in her penthouse, not professionally, just for herself. She'd taken lessons as a child but hadn't touched a piano in years. It felt good to create something, to connect with music in a way she'd forgotten was possible. David came by once a week to practice on her Steinway. Elena told him he was welcome any time, and she meant it. Sometimes she'd sit and listen, watching his fingers fly across the keys. Other times she'd be in another room working, the music drifting through the penthouse like a reminder that beautiful things could happen when you paid attention. Rosa still worked for Elena 3 times a week, but their relationship had shifted. They talked more now, real conversations, not just instructions and confirmations. Elena learned about Rosa's own dreams, the ones she'd put aside to support her son. They talked about David's progress, his struggles with theory classes, his excitement about upcoming performances. 6 months after the gala, David gave his first official recital at a small venue in downtown Manhattan. Elena sat in the front row, surrounded by some of the same people who'd attended her gala, but this time, no one was there for networking or social status. They were there for the music. David played beautifully, but what struck Elena most was how much he'd grown. Not just in skill, though that had improved too, but in confidence. He moved on stage like he belonged there, like he'd finally found the place he was meant to be. After the recital, Elena found Rosa in the lobby. They hugged without saying anything, both understanding what the other was feeling. "Thank you," Rosa whispered, "for seeing him." "Thank you for raising someone worth seeing," Elena replied. A year later, the Torres Music Foundation had helped 23 young musicians. 3 of them had been accepted to prestigious music schools. 1 had won a regional competition. The foundation was growing, attracting donations from other wealthy individuals who'd been inspired by David's story. Elena's penthouse was different now too. The piano was no longer just a status symbol or a decoration. It was played regularly by David during his practice sessions and occasionally by some of the other foundation students. The space felt more alive, more purposeful. David was thriving at the Manhattan School of Music, already being discussed as one of the most promising students in his class. Vincent Moretti had introduced him to several important figures in the classical music world. There was talk of a European tour the following year, but more than the accolades or the opportunities, what mattered most was simpler than that. A talented kid who'd been teaching himself piano at a church had found his path. A mother who'd worked tirelessly to support her son's dreams had seen those dreams come true. And a billionaire who'd been too focused on status and appearances had learned to see the extraordinary in unexpected places. One evening, Elena sat in her living room listening to David practice. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The music filled her home, and for the first time in years, Elena felt like she understood what true wealth really meant. It wasn't the penthouse or the business empire or the designer clothes. It was this: being able to change someone's life for the better, being able to recognize beauty and potential and help it flourish, being able to say yes when it mattered most. The piano music swelled, and Elena closed her eyes, grateful for the gift of a second chance. Not just for David, but for herself, too.